How powerful was Darth Plagueis? With Plagueis finally making his first canon appearance on screen, it's clear that he is meant to emulate his legend self as much as possible, clearly being the species of moon that he was in Legends, and looking identical to all Legends artwork and depictions that we've seen before. But one thing remains to be answered. Is Darth Plagueis as powerful as he was in his debut novel? And yet, before we can ever find that out, we must know, how strong was Darth Plagueis really? Was he just another entry in the long list of the Rule of Two? Or would he have been an extreme problem had he continued on living? After much research, we have found out that the Master of Sidious is even more dangerous than we originally had assumed, with the Archivist believing that he may even be able to defeat a prime Darth Vader. While that remains to be seen, we are certainly going to use today's holocron to detail the strength, powers, and feats of Plagueis the Wise. If you enjoy these specific power scaling type videos, be sure to leave a comment below on what other Jedi or Sith you'd like to see analyzed in this manner. But now, students of the Force, the old Sith Masters are calling, and we must open the holocron. In order to establish what kind of a man, or rather being, that we are dealing with here, it's important to note that Darth Plagueis was always considered to be a Palpatine level threat, something that Sidious himself admitted on several occasions. After his master's death, Sidious definitely grew substantially in power, but he always believed that Plagueis was one of the only two people that were a true rival to his rule, the second being Yoda. But during his time as an apprentice, Palpatine expressed that he considered Plagueis to be more powerful than his own understanding. At this point, it had been several decades since he had begun his training, but despite having grown tenfold in power, Sidious never truly knew how many steps behind Plagueis he was. Of course, this was intentional. Whenever Plagueis discovered the secret to life and death, Sidious was mystified by his power, and considered them to be ways of sorcery beyond his current knowledge. Even many years after Sidious became the Dark Lord, he wrote this in Plagueis' research notes: "I did not understand his work, but I am happy to take advantage of the results." Yet, even before Plagueis grew to the power that he was in his prime, his mere presence in the Force was so immense that just by standing on Naboo, he caused freak weather events to occur. Apparently, the planet of Naboo hides a dark side Force nexus deep within, and when Plagueis arrived on Naboo, he immediately sensed it, and the nexus interacted with his presence in the Force. The disturbance in the Force resulted in a terrible snowstorm and literal earthquakes. Here is a small piece from the novel to detail exactly what happened. Later, it would be said by Naboo and Gungan alike that they could not recall a colder winter than the one that followed Higo Damask's visit to their world. The rivers and even the falls below the city of Theed would freeze. The rolling plains and tall forests were blanketed with 3 meters deep of snow. Plasmic earthquakes rocked the Gallo Mountains and the Lake Country, the holy places, and the undersea city of Ota Gunga, and many of the egresses of the underwaterways that hollowed the planet were blocked by ice flows. Again, this is Darth Plagueis simply visiting a planet. He didn't even directly interact with the Force Nexus there. When he actually unleashed his power when fighting the Maladian assassins though, it nearly took Sidious off his feet when he witnessed firsthand just how powerful his master was. Palpatine had been concealing his own presence in the Force, so when he opened back up to it, he had to grasp a nearby table to keep himself upright. The power was too immense. He noted though that Plagueis felt like a nuclear orb of dark side power unspooling. Right after Sidious and Palpatine left that place where they had been attacked, the Jedi arrived behind them within minutes, having sensed the dark side so strongly that they immediately mobilized to end the threat. Plagueis simply releasing his power nearly cost the secrecy of the Rule of Two. Just his presence. Palpatine was always impressed by the way his master was able to interact with the Force and leave his imprint on it wherever he went. At one point, Sidious visited Plagueis' hidden mountain laboratory on his homeworld of Moon Alinist. Upon arriving, Palpatine felt the residual energy of Plagueis' experiments, noting that they had created a dark side nexus of its own on the planet, simply by Plagueis' studies. Palpatine said that the Nexus was unlike anything he had ever sensed before, stating that such power reminded him of only a single other location, the Sith world of Korriban. And yet, Plagueis himself had simply created it with rituals. But now that we have laid out how powerful Plagueis' presence was, let's go into his feats. Plagueis' manipulation of the midichlorians is an obvious talking point, but we want to really dig into how he accomplished this, starting with his telekinetic powers. This is almost always the starting point when we get into the strength of any force sensitive. Plagueis talks about sharpening his focus to the point of being able to influence the force on a microscopic level, making adjustments to his nano syringes with interacting with the molecules within. Eventually, he was able to sharpen his focus to the point of not requiring tools when interacting and influencing the midichlorians. It requires a deep concentration and meditation when using the force on a molecular level. The most common example of this is when one is creating a holocron, but Plagueis managed to figure out how to manipulate one's cells as a regular ability. He did this when experimenting on the false Sith Venomous. During this event, he allowed the Bith to die and then revived him. Sidious watched in horror and astonishment as Plagueis let the Bith die and brought him back again and again. He did it over and over again until Venomous's organs gave out, one of the most brutal ways to die in all of the lore. But we are quite familiar with what he was able to do with his experiments. But Plagueis' feats on a macro level are truly something else. Plagueis was able to immediately conjure force storms, turning every loose object within his vicinity into a deadly projectile with which to pierce and pummel his foes. Plagueis could also do this immediately, and he didn't have to gather power to pull this off. Rather, this was an ability he could pull off the cuff. Many of Plagueis' largest feats come from when he was battling the Maladian assassins that had caught him by surprise. While gravely injured, Plagueis managed to perform a Starkiller feat by releasing a force wave, one that literally atomized the body of 6 assassins in a single move. Plagueis disintegrated a third of his opponents with one attack. But following this, despite having part of his lower jaw and trachea completely severed, Plagueis was able to unleash a force bellow, one which was equivalent to the power of a sonic weapon, shattering the eardrums of all of his enemies within 10 meters. And of course, his talents with telekinesis translate to him being able to summon force barriers. He did so once while training Palpatine. Sidious had launched at him in a rage, only to be repulsed back by an invisible wall of energy. The same thing would happen to the Maladian assassins as they attempted to dogpile him with their vibroblades. All of this may sound impressive, but this is only the beginning of his feats, as many of them lay outside of telekinesis. Like many Dark Lords, Plagueis was quite talented in summoning Force Lightning, yet this was beyond deadly. Unlike Palpatine or most other Sith, Plagueis didn't choose to torture with his Force Lightning, but instead exclusively summoned it only to kill. At one point he used it on an Itachi, causing her blood to literally boil within her, nearly making her hands and flesh catch fire. As a comparison, a similar feat to this has been accomplished by Darth Vitiate, whose own Force Lightning made Revan's mask melt onto his face. Furthermore, Plagueis once used Terminus to absorb the energy from a blaster bolt, and then redistribute that into a spray of Force Lightning that may or may not have turned its targets to bones and dust. An example of Plagueis not only using, but repurposing energy. As far as other abilities, Plagueis was quite adept with many esoteric powers, specifically his ability to affect one's mind. His Force illusion was solid enough to trick a young Palpatine during training. But if that's not enough, Plagueis was able to undermine certain species' natural ability to resist his attacks of the mind. And astoundingly, Plagueis could even access and control the minds of Hutts. Plagueis could determine whether or not Jabba was lying to him during one of their many meetings. The Yanchori species also have a sort of anti-force bubble around them that keeps their minds from being penetrated, and yet Plagueis popped that like a bubble. It was nothing to him, and managed to control the Yanchori to his will. No being would ever want to be on the wrong side of the battlefield if a Sith Lord was there, and Plagueis had legitimately almost grown beyond the use of a lightsaber, with this being the seed that was planted in Palpatine's mind. Being so powerful, Plagueis found duels to be tedious, a useless affair, and yet he couldn't even be defeated by Darth Venomous, a man who was trained his entire life by Plagueis' own master, specifically with the skill sets to best Plagueis. And even he was a very little challenge to the Dark Lord. Venomous had even mastered Darth Plagueis' preferred lightsaber form, something that we believe to be Form 6 Nyman and Form 7 Juya. but Venomous still failed. Much like Sidious, this Dark Lord was exceptionally fast, being an expert in the ability of force speed. When fighting Venomous, the two Dark Lords looked as if they were flashes of lightning dancing on the ground. Back in his youth, Plagueis was stranded on the world of Baldemnik, and he had once used force speed to race across the main continent, doing so in a blur, outrunning a rainstorm in the process and crossing the entire thing in a span of a single evening. Let me say that again. Darth Plagueis ran across an entire continent in one evening, a feat that he was not largely fatigued by. Assuming one, like the Meladian assassins, could deal with some of these abilities and catch Plagueis without his lightsaber, it is still highly unlikely that anyone could stand up to Plagueis fist to fist. The Moon's physical strength was beyond any mortal when he enhanced his body with the gift of the Force. At one point, the Dark Lord punched straight through a transparisteel cockpit window when trying to escape, and when fighting the assassins, he plunged his fist straight through their alloy armor and their chests. Their armor meant nothing, as Plagueis snapped their necks and smashed their skulls with his arms and feet, all while 2 of his 4 hearts were in active failure. At one point, Plagueis had kicked his Zabrak into a wall with such force that it instantly snapped his spine and caved in his head. And when dueling Venomous, Plagueis slapped the lightsaber out of his hand with such strength that it nearly took off the Bith's fingers. There's no denying that Plagueis was a beast, especially when considering he is responsible for tipping the Force out of balance so dramatically that it had to correct itself with spawning the Jedi Chosen One. Plagueis and Palpatine as one are responsible for the shift in the paradigm which caused the veil of the dark side to cloud the vision of the Jedi, and Sidious had surmised that if they had wanted to, it would only take the 2 of them to defeat the entirety of the Jedi High Council. It is no wonder Palpatine elected to kill Plagueis when he was asleep. Had Plagueis not been inhibited by his breathing mask, the task of overthrowing him would have been monumental. The author of the Plagueis novel, James Luceno, even said that had it come down to a lightsaber duel between Sidious and Plagueis, it's more than likely that Plagueis would have beat the apprentice. He was long-lived, and full of arcane knowledge of the dark side that even Sidious didn't fully understand, and he was certainly far more powerful than any of us had realized. Again, Darth Sidious did not comprehend Plagueis' massive power. Had Plagueis been allowed to achieve immortality, it's difficult to see anyone being able to take him down other than Vader without his suit. And Plagueis could rank up there in potential of power with individuals like Nihilus, Vitiate, and Sidious. Extremely high company. But those comparisons and discussions are for you to hash out in the comments. So tell us, my friends, had you known just how powerful Plagueis really was? And does this knowledge change how you viewed either Plagueis or Palpatine as a Sith? We definitely want to get your thoughts on Plagueis, as we are very excited to share the powers of one of our favorite Sith Lords. Most of the time we talk about the lore or the experiments of Plagueis, and it is hard to grasp just how monumentally powerful the Dark Lord really was. He is absolutely a Palpatine level threat, maybe even stronger. And if you would like to see us discuss Darth Plagueis in greater detail, please be sure to let us know in the comments down below. As always, my friends, thank you so much for joining us today on this Holocron reading, and may the Force be with you.